I'm Amanda Kovacs. I work with Prevention Resources and the Safe Communities Coalition. We're just going to go over some odds and ends here before we get started. Tonight we're going to have a great presentation and some conversation. If you have any questions for our panelists, I'd like you to put them in the Q&A box. And if you need any assistance, put that in the chat box. To get started tonight, we just kind of wanted to do some polls. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that. And if you guys would be so kind as to answer those, that would be greatly appreciated. So I'll give that a few minutes. While you guys are doing the poll, I'd like to turn it over to Leslie Gable, Prevention Resources co-CEO.
Good evening. Had to find all the different clicks and where I was. So thank you, Amanda. But please continue to take those polls if you haven't. Hello, my name is Leslie Gable. I'm the co-CEO of Prevention Resources, as well as the project director of the Safe Communities Coalition. I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners for tonight's event, the Hunterdon County Prosecutor's Office and the Hope One Initiative. The Hunterdon County Prosecutor's Office has launched a brand new app, which we look forward to learning more about tonight. The Hope One Initiative is managed by the Hunterdon County Human Services and the Sheriff's Departments. It offers outreach to family and friends who may not know how to access important services for a loved one who is suffering from addiction or is in the need of mental health services. The Hope One van travels to different parts of the county, providing these much needed resources. More information will be coming out in the upcoming weeks on where the van will be traveling to. We're really happy to announce also that the Hope One van will also be collecting unused and unwanted prescription drugs that are in need of disposal. We're also asking everyone to download the Help app from Prevention Resources, the Positive Youth Initiative. This app connects youth to local, state, federal resources, and it's on substance use, mental health, suicide, self-harm, bullying, and abuse and domestic violence, as well as has many other resources, including all the prescription drug drop-off locations. Tonight's program will be focusing on opioids and the risk that many athletes, as well as anyone that may be in the situation to be prescribed an opioid. Opioids are sometimes called narcotics, are medications prescribed by doctors to treat persistent or severe pain. These prescription pain relievers you may know as oxycodone, Vicodin, Percocet, morphine, and many others. Opioids are also include the illegal drug heroin and fentanyl. Addiction is very possible with opioids. It can make your brain and body believe that the drug is necessary for survival. Our panelists will be discussing this further tonight. I have the distinct honor to introduce our panelists tonight: Acting County Prosecutor Mike Williams, Acting County Chief of Detectives Frank Crisologo, Student Assistance Counselor, All-Star Athlete and Coach Tom Bill, and our very special guest, Carrie Rhodes. Carrie is also an athlete herself, a coach, professional counselor, and most importantly, Taylor's mom. We have an opportunity to ask our panelists experts questions as the night goes on, as Amanda was saying. But first, we'd like to start tonight with a 5-minute video that is dedicated to ending the stigma of addiction and mental illness, Taylor Rhodes' story.
Every day since Taylor died, I started to write. This is from day 34. I tell myself over and over, I will not let this all be for nothing. I will be honest and vulnerable and brave because you were. I will show the good, the bad, and the ugly. You and I will own this story, and we will walk inside it together, just like we did for 20 years and 12 days. Love, Mom.
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor was the big personality in the family. I don't know that he necessarily always wanted to be center of attention, but he didn't mind it either.
He liked to live life big. He came out with a foot on the gas pedal. He wanted to go, go, go.
He was fearless. He was going to do anything to kind of achieve his goals.
He had a huge heart, extremely loyal, maybe to a fault at times. He just loved big.
He taught me a ton of life lessons, and his addiction probably taught me the most important ones.
He was a great athlete. He could do anything he wanted to do. At the age of 14 or 15 years old, Taylor had a pretty significant tennis injury.
It started with a shoulder surgery and a bottle of Percocet to manage his pain, and that was the beginning.
It was years later that he would tell us that when he took that Percocet, it was the first time his brain lit up. It was the first time he felt normal. It was the first time he didn't feel anxiety. He didn't feel depressed because he had a history of anxiety and depression. And he said from that point on, he was hooked. It wasn't necessarily, it was just opiates. It was Xanax, pot, alcohol. Sometimes it was just whatever he could get his hands on.
He'd say, well, I'm not doing anything different than other kids were doing. And he was right. He wasn't. But, he knew that every time he touched any of those things, his life went terribly wrong. I mean, terribly wrong.
Seeing it consume him in a way and consume our family, I kind of isolated myself. I had no control, no influence on what he did next. It's pretty a lonely place, honestly.
It is like grieving a child that you love more than anything, and they're standing right in front of you, but you don't recognize them. You see the drugs, and they're vacant.
There were times where I was very angry at him. There were times where, I was ashamed of him. But most of the time, I was very sad. And as hard as we tried, we couldn't help him. We struggled to try to find good, compassionate care time and time again. Even when we did, it was extremely fragmented.
We have these siloed models with mental illness and substance use. We've either picked one or the other. And as a mental health professional, I could not believe it.
When Taylor was in treatment, oftentimes, they just wanted to treat him for his addiction. If you don't treat the underlying mental health issues that typically come with addiction, you're only treating maybe not even half of it.
There's an urgency in treatment, and the gaps are big. And with things, being tainted with fentanyl these days, every relapse is potentially your child's death. And that's what happened to Taylor.
When you're the parent of someone who's suffering from addiction, you play those moments over in your mind periodically when you're going to get that phone call. But I can tell you, it doesn't prepare you for when it really happens.
I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't breathe to know that your son, doesn't get another day. I don't get to see him get married. I don't get to see him have kids.
He was just such a huge part of our family. And we'll just never be able to experience that anymore.
Just having someone take on life, even when my parents circle, Never did want to be an only child.
Taylor had several tattoos. One of his tattoos was a quote, "If you think it's hard to watch, imagine how hard it is to live." All he wanted was for people just to love him, and at the end of the day, treat him like anybody else. So our plight, our journey from now till the time we can't, we're going to spend most of our energy trying to help those who are facing the same struggle that we faced.
I just, want it to be treated like any other disease. They're normal people that struggle like everyone else.
They're people that people love the most in this world, and we don't treat them like that. We treat them like it's some moral failing or some lack of willpower, and it's not. It's a brain disease. Behind the use is this beautiful person who has a family and who is loved by people. I hope when you hear our story, you think about it differently.
Every day I try to honor him because he's worth honoring.
Carrie, I just want to say on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for sharing Taylor's story with all of us this evening. Um, your courage and dedication of your family in helping to stop the stigma of mental health and substance abuse stigma is greatly appreciated. Carrie, tell us, what else would you like us to know about Taylor?
Well, first, I want to thank you guys for having me and for playing Taylor's story, because I think it's an important story for parents to hear, and for students also to hear. I mean, Taylor was just, this kind of big force in the world, and as his mom, it never occurred to me that this is, the walk I would have as a parent, or that this is what he would go through. We have learned in the fire, the hard way, as a family, and anybody out there who has a teenager that's struggling with substance use disorder or with substances. I'm sure you know a little bit about what I'm talking about, but I didn't realize, and I've been a therapist for 28 years. So as a mental health professional, and I was a college athlete. I had 2 kids who were incredibly athletic. As a mom, I have 2 beautiful children, Taylor, and then I have a daughter, Blair, and both were tremendous athletes. And I did not realize that the ADHD that Taylor had put him at tremendous risk for substance use disorder, or the anxiety that he had, which was pretty prevalent for him, all the way through. And we tried to find different ways to help him manage that. But when he had his shoulder injury, at the end of his, it was it was in January of his freshman year, and he was a really good tennis player. And when he injured it and had to have surgery, if I would have understood then how dangerous opiates are. I mean, we are giving young people with developing brain most addictive drugs on the planet. I've been properly educated professional who prescribed them to me. And had I really understood the Russian roulette that I was getting ready to play with my son's brain, I would have never touched it as a parent. One of the things you guys don't hear in this story, is that my younger daughter, Blair, who you hear in this video, she's a college athlete, and she's playing softball at Elon University. And at the beginning of her fall season this year, she tore her labrum just like her brother did. And we the drill. I had the same surgery, my son had it. And when we went and met with the surgeon, to discuss her surgery and her rehab, the same protocol that they gave to Taylor, they also gave to Blair. And that was surgery and Percocet to manage her pain. And of course, as a parent, we weren't going down that road again.
Yeah.
And I was really shocked that there was some pushback, like, but she's going to need it. She's going to be in pain. And then when you say to people, well, this is part of what happened to my son, and how it was the match that lit the flame, and hijacked his brain, I believe. And we're not going to go there again. Then they scrambled to find some alternatives. And for our daughter, she was given a non-opioid pain management that was given to her in her anesthesia, and she had a pain block that, instead of lasting for 8 to 12 hours, lasted for her 6 days, but I think on average it's 3 or 4 days. And so her surgery, and her, as an athlete, which is, her shoulder surgery is really a painful surgery. It was managed with Tylenol. And she's done phenomenal. She's still recovering, as I tape this. But as a mom, I feel like doctors are still prescribing. There's nothing that's changed. And I was just blown away by that. Like, in the 5 years, and we've had so much like the opiate epidemic is on the front page of the paper all the time. And I thought, well, surely things have changed, and we've really changed how we're managing these surgeries. And it's same protocol, and when I asked, like, why is that what we're doing still? The answer was, well, cost. And, and talking to different health professionals, I think we all do what we're trained to do and what we know. And I just think as a parent, you know, until the healthcare profession catches up and until doctors catch up, we as parents really need to educate ourselves and advocate for our children, because, you know, I mean, opiates are nothing to play with, and an injury, you know, we can, you know, I would rather have Taylor's injury taken months to heal and him just, you know, be in some pain than have given him something that, you know, he would later go on to say, you know, made his brain feel normal for the first time. And they're incredibly powerful. And, you know, like we mentioned in the video, and this week, you know, if anybody's watched the news, you know, you've seen, it's kind of on the front page again, but with fentanyl, there are no second chances. If something is laced with fentanyl, if your child gets a tablet that they think is Xanax or any other thing and it's laced with fentanyl,
Yeah.
you know, you don't have a lot of time. They don't, you know, used to, if people were struggling with addiction, you know, they had, they you know, they figured, well, you're going to relapse for X number of times and things like that. And fentanyl has just really changed the game. And that's what happened to our son. So I
So
mean,
let's ask, because I know that most people might know what heroin is, but they don't know about fentanyl. Can I ask Prosecutor Williams, can you talk to us a little bit about the opioids, the fentanyl, and what we're seeing here in New Jersey, Hunterdon County?
Sure, Leslie. First, I'd like to thank Carrie for sharing her family story with us. It's incredibly powerful, and you know, I think everyone can learn from that. So I thank you for that, Carrie, and your family as well. But talking about fentanyl, you know, I didn't know that much about it until I became you know, the prosecutor here in Hunterdon County, and I became aware how prevalent it is. Just for those who might not know what it is, it's a synthetic opioid that's used to treat severe pain, like Carrie mentioned for her son Taylor. But what's really terrible about it is that it's 50 to 100 times stronger than the heroin or morphine that people can get, and it's often made in illegal drug labs. Why? Because it's cheap and it's easy to manufacture. I don't want to get too much into statistics, but here in Hunterdon County, the heroin and cocaine that we have seized within the county borders, over 90% of it had fentanyl in it. And it's an extremely deadly substance. And I think one way to really show exactly kind of what I'm talking about is if you look at this envelope, it's just a normal business envelope. And this can contain enough fentanyl to kill over 10,000 people. I mean, think about that for a minute. Just a couple of grains of fentanyl can kill a person. That's how deadly that this substance is. Another way to look at it, you know, the envelope I think is a good way to put in perspective how deadly fentanyl is. But another way to think about it is, if you think about every year in the last decade, from say 2010 to 2020, the equivalent of a small New Jersey town died during the opioid crisis. So think of a town like West Amwell. Think of a town like the town of Clinton. That's how deadly that fentanyl is.
Thank you, Prosecutor. Chief, if I can ask you, I know you and I have spent some time together while we developed a film called The Fentanyl Factor. And I learned quite a lot from you. Can you tell us more about why somebody would be using heroin? And when we're talking about the prescription drugs, how does that move us over what you're seeing with some of the cases on how they move to heroin, and then how do they, you know, get fentanyl? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, thank you, Leslie. First, I want to say to Carrie, thank you very much for sharing your story here in public. It's a very powerful story. It's a sad story. I feel for you and your family. However, like you said in the film, you're hoping that some good could come from it, and you are helping people by sharing your story here in allowing everybody to see a little bit about what you went through. because it is very powerful and it's very strong, and I think it resonates with people. And secondary, Leslie, I want to thank you and Prevention Resources for bringing this to our county and allowing people to be educated on the dangers of fentanyl. To answer your question, okay, so just like Carrie's son Taylor, he just was getting a prescription that had an opioid in it, and some people have predispositions to become addicted to these very powerful prescribed drugs that are there to try to help people from a pain. In Taylor's instance, it was a surgery. We see that a lot. The problem is once those prescriptions run out, the brain is telling the person that they need this substance, and so whether they can get it legally through a prescription, which after a little while runs out, then they try to get it illegally. And the problem with getting things illegally, like anything, these substances, whether it's a Xanax or cocaine or what you think is a Percocet, things along those lines, the illegal people that want to, drug dealers that want to make money and sell these substances, put things like fentanyl in it, which is extremely powerful. And there's another one coming up behind it called carfentanil, which is much more potent than fentanyl. And they have pill presses. They have things that make it look just like what you would be prescribed. So you can't tell the difference really between the two. You're thinking that your friend or someone that you trust is giving you something that you've had before and makes you feel a certain way and you like it. And just as the prosecutor said, one grain, a couple grains of salt could be enough to kill someone, and they don't even know it. They're just taking this to try to alleviate some need that they have for this substance, and they're thinking it's a pill that they've had 100 times before. And the problem is you just don't know what's inside this pill.
Yeah, I know that's how Prince died, and he had, in fact, the doctors in the ER had his prescription bottle, and they couldn't even tell that the fake oxys, that's what they thought were in the bottle, were actually counterfeit. They did not, because some of the things we've learned from the DEA this week is that they actually they smell and they taste just like the real thing. So the counterfeits are unbelievable as far as being able to try to detect the difference, and we know that. If I can talk a bit as we're talking about athletes tonight, we know that athletes in particular are at a high risk, and we know that they're at a high risk because of the likelihood of injury, and their injury would lead them to managing pain. And I'd like to ask, Coach Bill, if I can, as we're talking about athletes, one of the things that I know from athletes is that the likelihood is that they will hide pain. They have a high threshold for pain. They're taught to push themselves forward. We know that they're very competitive. So what do you see, Tom, with the stresses that the athletes and even the students that we know that you work with? What sort of stress are they under today to succeed?
Well, and like everybody else, Carrie, an honor and a privilege to be a part of tonight's discussion and to be able to maybe help in any way. Leslie, I when you had sent out a question about what are our teens facing, and how can we help them, and yesterday I just randomly, at school here, talked to some kids in my office and just kind of asked them that question, what, not just athletes, but, what are the stresses that as, as corny as it might have sounded when I asked them, what are the stresses that you're feeling? It was across the board. Every one of them talked about, the pressure to fit in, the pressure to thinking what other people are thinking about them. Those, the social media, in a way, their peers, the pressure that they're feeling to fit in. And the athletes, I'm thankful and blessed, right, to be a part of a program and a community where trying to connect and have conversations like we had spoken the other night about, right? Having conversations and bringing into the locker room, bringing into school, bringing into my office, into the hallways, open dialogue and conversation to try to create a space where, and it's a process, trying to create a space where the kids feel safe. I heard somebody say yesterday, creating not a safe space or a safe space, but also a brave space where young people can feel and begin to learn to communicate how they're feeling and the fears of whether it's on the field and wanting to, make the starting lineup and we openly try to bring that discussion into our locker room about and create a place where they can feel comfortable talking about their uncomfortability, if that makes any sense. Just trying to create, because the truth is, and we say it, and that idea that we can begin to learn how to communicate how we're thinking and feeling. And I know that, right, it sounds, but when we can do that, we instantly learn that we have a lot more in common than we do different.
Yes.
But we know walking the halls, the kids, and just like I did, like I think all of us have experienced. You think you're in this isolated world and these fears and these self-centered, but yet when you can get people talking and connecting and sharing, it is amazing how, and that connection just begins to maybe open up a space and a new way and just maybe help them not feel like they have to gain that peace or that comfort, that security in a substance, which we know the substance doesn't care, right? Alcohol, drugs doesn't care what our plan is. I don't believe it's anybody's plan to become addicted. In fact, I know it isn't, but yet the substances could care less what our plan is. And that idea of I just so much, I just feel that idea of your sons, and I don't, right, that idea of the pain, the emotional, mental anguish long before the substance was put into the body. And then for those that are suffering emotionally, and when that substance goes into the body, it's like I've heard people share many times, it's like a magic potion. It becomes the answer, not excusing anybody's behavior, but it becomes, and we know it's hard to understand that, right? When you don't know, but
right. And I think you're making a good point. And for Taylor, like, I mean, we gave him medicine a doctor gave him, and that if I could undo that, I would. But I think it made his brain feel normal for the first time. And he didn't go, I mean, he didn't mess with opiates until he went to college. I mean, because it was always like, I'm smarter than that. I would never do that. And nobody who starts to use, I mean, it's alcohol and marijuana. And I think we have a lot of young people and even parents think that, yeah, it's not a big deal or it's a rite of passage. But it's definitely a gateway, and it's priming the brain for addiction and upping the chances. We know that, younger that people are experimenting and trying, the more likelihood they have of being hooked, and nobody knows. I mean, Taylor said many times, Mom, I do not want to have this. Like, I don't want this struggle. And, you know, I mean, he, you know, in the, when he was in recovery, he said, yeah, I just want to be able to, like, when I'm 21, sit down with dad and have a beer. And the reality was he was never going to be able to do that. Because when he used that opiate, you know, his brain was hijacked. But, you know, marijuana does the same thing, alcohol. I mean, we have a lot of young people with substance use disorders. And, you know, and it only goes up the older they get. I mean, once 18 to 25, I mean, it's like 1 in every 7 people have substance use disorder. Well, we're not treating that many people. We're not helping that many people.
Yeah.
You know, and what you don't want to do is have people fall in. And a lot of what you guys are talking about are what I call like upstream measures, where, like, you know, once our kids fall in the river and they get in that place, we're in deep trouble, because the system is not, you know, that whole video, a lot of it was about the gaps, and once you're in trouble. It's the prevention piece that you guys, in, you know, I think in Herndon are really, you know, working on and trying to build and do well, because we need to keep our kids from falling in the river, as parents, and that's our job, is to get them, you know, to adulthood safely. And social media and, you know, the pressure that kids are under makes that really, really hard. And, you know, I think as young people, you know, we got to find a balance with some of the technology and the pressure they feel, in this fake book world, that a lot of them are living in.
Yeah. Thank you, Carrie, for that, and Coach Bill. We've got some questions coming in. Either the prosecutor or the chief. I know I've heard this question before. Why is it that the drug dealers are lacing heroin or the counterfeit pills with fentanyl? If it's so deadly, why would they risk killing their customers? You know, is it for a better high? I know that we've heard people chasing the better high, but if they have the risk, you know, why would the dealers do this, and why would someone seek this? I don't know who would like to take that.
I can answer that. Believe it or not, it actually enhances the drug dealer's product. You wouldn't think that would be the case, but we have had conversations with many people that we have Operation Helping Hands here at the prosecutor's office, and as a result of that, we try to intervene and help people that are in the throes of addiction, and they talk to us and they tell us these stories. We also have talked to dealers who have, been arrested and pushed this substance. It helps sell the product. So every product usually has a stamp on it, and that stamp is specific to that product. Well, unfortunately, and as crazy as this sounds, if a person were to have overdosed on a product that has a certain stamp on it, the other addicted people look and crave that product because they believe that it's going to carry that much bigger of a high, and that they rationalize it out to say, you know, the individual who passed away just didn't have the tolerance that they have, or whatever in their irrational mind at the time helps them to get to that place where they're going to look for this. But the answer to that question is it actually enhances the sales capacity of that dealer's product.
If I can add on to that, Frank, before I came to the prosecutor's office, I spent over 30 years in the New Jersey Attorney General's office in the Division of Criminal Justice, and I did 700-800 criminal appeals there, and a lot of them are drug cases. And one thing I noticed, and I started keeping a list of it because I found it so odd, but going to your point, Chief, they market it this way. You know, a lot of the drugs are marked, you know, body bag, you know, death sentence, things along those lines, because it enhances sales. And the other thing with fentanyl, it's cheap. It's really inexpensive to make. It's way cheaper than the heroin or the cocaine itself that they use for a cutting agent. And you know, it is a selling point for the product.
Thank you, guys. I know, Carrie, when we saw in Taylor's film, that, you know, no one ever starts out, and I think you mentioned it, Carrie, right? That no one ever starts out or says, I want to become someone who uses heroin or addicted to heroin. That is not how anyone starts off. And they always think that they can manage to get ahead of it. And I just want to make sure that, our audience tonight understands that what happens is when the addiction takes over the brain, and you can no longer get the the prescriptions that they started with, is you can buy heroin, bags of heroin, $3 to $5 in New Jersey, and the potencies are incredibly strong. So no one ever says that this is the where I'm going to. And I think, again, Carrie, you mentioned it with Taylor, it became what substances, I can't maybe get this substance, so I'm going to get something else, because it hijacks the brain and you no longer can make the decisions. And I think, Frank, you were saying that is why would someone go and seek this? Because their brain does not work the way that a brain that can make those proper decisions. And I think, one of the questions, Carrie, is that was asked, is you mentioned ADHD as being a high risk. Why do you happen to know why that's more susceptible to addiction?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so we know that young people with mental health disorders, and particularly, I think, anxiety and depression, and then ADHD. But ADHD is a neurological disorder that affects executive functioning. So, it's the frontal part of your brain that controls your ability to make decisions. And in young people, it's not developed on the best of days, right? We all were dumb teenagers at one point, right? And we were lucky all to be here. But with kids with attention deficit disorder, that impulsivity is a really marked piece of ADHD, and it's that impulsivity that chooses that gets kids to do things without regard to consequence, right? Because we're saying to kids, well, just don't do it, or think about the consequences. They don't think about the consequences, and kids with ADHD are less likely to think about the consequences. And when and for a lot of kids, they're stimulants, we give people stimulants to control ADHD as well. And so a lot of times those stimulants kind of calm their brain down or quiet their brain in a way. And so Taylor definitely struggled with ADHD. He never had any kind of hyperactivity, but he definitely was impulsive, and he struggled with anxiety. He was that what if kid, thinking like his brain was always like, what if this happens, or what if this happens? And he would worry. And, we actually tried, when he was in the 5th grade, we actually tried some medication with him to see if it would help him. And so, but I didn't realize that, as a parent, that, having anxiety, having ADHD, we had a family history in our family. My paternal grandfather, had an addiction. So, those are all things as a parent, I really wish that pediatricians, when they when they tell us all the other things they told us about, for our kids and to be careful of, I wish that they were talking more about, hey, these are things that make you more at risk, because I think kids need to know they're more at risk too. I mean, I think as a teenager, I wish, not that I know that, teenagers inevitably are bad decision makers a lot of times. They just are. But to be able to operate from a place of knowledge, like to understand that, once your brain is hijacked, you're in trouble. It's going to call you. I had an addiction specialist here in Richmond explain it to me. It's like once you flip that switch, it's like all of us, if you don't eat dinner, your body calls food, right? It says all you can think about is food, and you can't wait to get food, and and it continues like that until you quell it. And so folks who are in recovery are, they're rock stars in my book, because I watched firsthand how hard it was to have something and that calls you so loudly, and to resist that. And what we don't want are young people doing that. But ADHD is definitely a risk factor for kids, because the impulsivity of the brain.
Thank you, Carrie. Tom, we have a question for you. How do you think the pandemic and isolation has affected teens and the risk of substance abuse and misuse?
Yeah, I think, right. So we're talking about connection, and maybe, right, with the pandemic, the isolation, right. And that idea of, again, in a way, being alone with your thoughts, being alone with, and not being able to, and you begin to internalize, right, a lot of things that when you if you can make a connection and you can talk about things, you realize, okay, I'm not alone. But when I feel alone, or when I'm right, and the thoughts are coming and going and creating the feelings of fear and anxiety, anything that's creating those feelings, if a substance goes in the body and creates the feeling of, and again, I'm not excusing behaviors, and when I say, please, I hope this, when I say it works, until it doesn't work. When I mean it works, it changes the way you feel. So someone who's feeling anxious, stressed, depressed, when you're feeling that way, so the pandemic certainly can, and which is why we have to, right, as parents, as we have to do all we can to keep the connections as much as we can. That's why it's so great on, right, hybrid days. I encourage anybody, if you can, send your kids to school, and I mean that in a healthy, safe way. But so that we can be around each other, so we have a shot at, again, connecting with people. I just want to share, if I can, and I don't know if you can see but I'll never forget. So being in recovery myself, one of the most powerful things when I was in a recovery center, 30 years ago, the counselor stood in front of us and he put his hands and he said, people with substance abuse issues, many times emotionally, they start out down here. And somebody who's not predisposed or doesn't have the addiction, right, emotionally, they're up here. I'm not less than or worse than, but so then when that substance goes into that body for somebody with the emotional predisposition, that substance takes you up to feeling normal, like Carrie had said, where doesn't mean like somebody, my wife, somebody who not an addict, not an alcoholic. Yes, the effects, right? Alcohol does what it does, but okay, you come up, you feel the effects, and then you come back down. For somebody like people that are battling addiction, and I'm not excusing behaviors, but it goes from here, you go up to here, and then you go back down, and over time, you go lower and lower emotionally, which just fuels that searching out that medicine, right? We hear it, self-medication. You search out that medicine to feel, like Carrie had said, feeling normal, to feel okay, to feel some sort of peace. So
Yeah. So one of the things too, Tom, when we were talking about some of the isolations, and I know that I've heard this from other, others in prevention, as well as we talk about this as healthy alternatives, right? So there's healthy alternatives, right, and how we can connect. And Prevention Resources ran this all throughout the summer and the fall, but now it's cold, right? But it's still important to get out, to exercise, right? When we say about fueling the body with good, healthy foods, but also ensuring that activity and getting the fresh air, and as you mentioned, Tom, getting back into school. So I do want to mention when we're talking to our youth about, and anyone, right? I tell you, I got up and I actually forced myself in 19-degree weather to get out and get fresh air this morning. It was cold, but it was still great, but I felt better, right? So that's something else that we really want to make sure our youth and adults, everyone knows, especially in this pandemic, is there's alternatives to help us feel better. And that's some of the things that we definitely need to keep pushing. We do have another question.
Leslie, if I could, real quick, I'm sorry. I
No,
know
go ahead, Coach.
And I don't want to speak because I'm sure Carrie can probably say it much better or with more, but the idea of mindfulness, right? And just how in 2021, we now know beyond a shadow of a doubt that mindfulness works, right? They can image the brain, right? It's real. Mindfulness, breathing techniques, how it really does work. And I think what I heard somebody put it this way, it really helped me when I'm talking with kids and my own kids and myself. That idea, I heard somebody put it this way: right? Athletes, they go to the gym, right? If they're going to work their legs, they're doing squats, whatever the exercises are, right? You're going to the gym. And I heard this guy say mindfulness, if you can look at it as you're going to the gym, it's no different. You're going to the gym for your brain, for your mind. And I just thought, like, and it's not some philosophical mumbo jumbo. It's like, no, for real. It really is going to the gym. And that, but it sounds too, right? A simple solution for complicated people. You go, oh, come on, buddy.
Right.
You know, breathing, mindfulness is going to really change my life and help me. And I'm probably am lecturing, but yeah, I am saying that without question. And that it is going to the gym for and it works, but we have to work it, right? You have to incorporate it just like any other training, right? Athletes, we get into our routines. You're in the weight room 4 days a week, whatever your mindfulness will change in my humble opinion, will change your life. And I know Carrie can probably say it much better.
I think you said it. I think you said it great, Tom. But I mean, like athletes, we spend a lot of time on the physical part of our sport. But anybody who plays a sport knows that 90% of any sport is between your ears, and that's the hardest part to conquer. And and mindfulness, when we teach the brain to find calm, and that's what mindfulness is doing. And there are two great apps that I love. Calm. If you're a teenager, most of my teenagers that I work with love the app called Calm, and then Headspace, and both of them have lots of free stuff on them, especially with COVID. So it's accessible to anybody, but you're teaching your brain a path to calm. It's like when you learn to dribble a basketball for the first time, your brain doesn't have a path. So we practice over and over again so that when we perform as athletes, we don't have to think. I mean, you're cursed as an athlete if you got to now think about what you're doing, right? But if we can teach our brain that path to calm, and we connect, and I teach kids in my program that I work with, it connects you to the best in yourself. And it helps us to feel our feelings and check into our bodies, because a lot of us, life runs 1,000 miles an hour. And most of us, when your head hits the pillow and your brain starts going 10,000 miles an hour, mindfulness is just a way to teach the brain to find calm. And it's a superpower. It really is. I mean, we know that 10 minutes of mindfulness a day is more effective than 150 milligrams of Zoloft, which is one of the leading anti-anxiety meds. And I'll just throw this out there just for anybody who wants to hear about it. But there's another tool that I have found recently that I found incredibly powerful around anxiety and depression. But it's called tapping, and it's called EFT officially. It's called emotional freedom technique, but it's tapping. We're using it in schools here. I'm using it with my kids, and I have seen it's been amazing. It's almost like you're using magic with people, but it's another way to flood the brain with calm. And it's basically needleless acupuncture points. So you stimulate the brain, a stress, and then you tap on these points, and you're flooding the brain with feel-good chemicals at the same time. And the brain always takes the positive. So it's just another tool or thing that, parents can just be aware of. It's out there for your child to use to help them regulate and to connect to themselves.
Well, Carrie, that sounds like another whole event that might be tapping you into. I think we could all use a little bit of that. But yeah, so that's Carrie just set us up for another event. This is something that a question came in here that has been weighing on a lot of our minds in New Jersey. But the prosecutor and the chief, do you think these two questions maybe you could also tap into is one of the audience members wants to know is where are teens getting these dangerous drugs from, one, and two is around the legalization of marijuana. Well, why don't we have that one first? Where are all these dangerous drugs? Where can they get them? And I know when I first moved here, I asked that question, is how would I know as a parent, where are they finding them? Because our county here in Hunterdon is very spread out. It's not like there's these central places you can go. So how are these dangerous drugs getting into our county?
One thing that came to my mind right off the bat when you said that is something that most people probably don't think about. It's the medicine cabinet. It's mom's or dad's drugs that they have, some prescription that they might have, and one of their kids might get started that way. Also, there's a lot of it on the street. I know the chief can probably talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, if I can just touch on that, Mike, you set
Sure.
up for a very perfect point that if you have medicines in your home medicine cabinet, one of the things you can do from a prevention is to lock and secure these medicines. And when you no longer need them, if there is to properly dispose, and we have prescription drop-off boxes. And if one of my fellow folks could put that in our chat, if folks want to know where you can drop them off securely. And it is very critical to ensure that we know that 70% of teens start misusing of prescriptions in home medicine cabinets, but also from getting it from a loved one and a friend. We know athletes also share because they want to make sure that they help their friends. Frank, can I pose this question to you? Do you think the legalization of marijuana will help monitor and regulate the actual makeup of drugs people are using by legalizing marijuana?
I don't. I have a concern with the legalization of marijuana. I understand that, in medical circumstances, it may be something that may be useful for someone in a medical capacity, but in recreational, I have concerns. I have concerns, not just the smoking type of marijuana, but the edibles and the way it's marketed to our youth. I have a grave concerns there, and I think Colorado has experienced it before us, and I think we should probably do a little research into how it's affected their communities there. To answer the other question that the prosecutor also chimed in on was, where do you get them? Well, Hunterdon County is no different than any other place, and New Jersey is not that big of a place, so. Anything that you can get in one of our cities, whether it's in south, north, east, and west, we're kind of in the middle. You can get here. On top of that, the internet is full of people that will just send it to your house if they're looking for it, and they go on the web, the dark web. Unfortunately, if people want a product bad enough, they'll figure out ways to go find it.
Yeah. Thank you, Chief. So we've got more questions coming in. So one of the questions that was asked is, what were the first signs that Taylor was having an issue with substances, Carrie?
So, for the first signs that we had a problem, and this is somebody who's been in mental health for a really long time. I missed it. I'll tell you that right now. I mean, I saw what he was doing as not, like just just being a teenager experimenting. And, it took a while for me to really recognize that we had a problem. But I mean, Taylor was a great athlete. He was a really, really smart kid. He was lazy. He was a lazy student, but he was a really good student. But at his grades, some of the things you hear about, his grades started to slip. He stopped caring about things that he typically cared about. Didn't really care about sports as much. And the things that were important to him just stopped being important. And what became the most important thing was chasing that high and being with friends and, partying and things like that. And, but some of the first signs where they stopped caring about a lot of the things that, he typically did, he did care about, which, really were which was school and sports and these kinds of things.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We have another question, and it's asking, what do you think healthcare providers can do or need to help with the issue with prevention? Since most of you are on the law side of it, maybe prosecutor, could you talk a little bit about Operation Helping Hands? Because I don't think most people in our county are aware of this, and I think it's an incredible, and also maybe touch on the LEAP program that we do in our county, which is very unique.
Sure, Leslie. I'll start with the last part first. I'll start with LEAP. What it stands for is a Law Enforcement Adolescent Program, and it's kind of unique to Hunterdon County. It began back in 2011, collaboration with the prosecutor's office and then prosecutor Anthony Kearns, and with your organization, Leslie, Prevention Resources. And think of it as like an early intervention program for juveniles who've gotten in trouble with the law. It's a diversionary program for them where law enforcement can resolve minor infractions without sending the case to family court for resolution as a juvenile delinquency matter. The program usually lasts about 4 to 8 weeks. It includes things like counseling, life skills, education for parents. They may or may not be aware of what's going on with their child or the problems that their child is facing. It often involves community service, different conditions like that the juvenile has to meet to avoid getting that juvenile delinquency complaint. Couple of really good benefits is if they're successfully complete the program, then the underlying unlawful conduct is considered resolved by law enforcement. So if there was a charge, it goes away. If there was never a charge, one doesn't get filed. The other good thing about it is it's free. So this is a great resource and help for adolescents who are getting into trouble. Switching over to Operation Helping Hand, a lot of people might not know this, but last year, New Jersey got over $7 million from the federal government to fight the opioid epidemic that this state and every other state, is currently experiencing and has been experiencing. And Operation Helping Hand is the New Jersey Attorney General sponsored grant that all 21 county prosecutors' offices participate in. I believe this year will be our third year that we'll be going forward with the Operation Helping Hand program. I know when this started probably 4 or 5 years ago, I think there were only a couple of county prosecutors' offices that had it. So it's spread, everyone has it in every county in New Jersey. Here's essentially what it is. The law enforcement will identify someone who's a drug user or arrest someone for possession of drugs. And what they'll do is they'll offer them an option. Look, here's treatment. This is a program that you can enter into. If you do so and follow through with it and go through the recovery process, at the end, those criminal charges will go away. So it's kind of a carrot and stick approach. We don't take away the stick, but we have the carrot there of here's some help that you can get. The really important part of Operation Helping Hand, what really makes it work for those that choose it, are the recovery coaches. And those are individuals who typically have had substance use disorders themselves, and they're recovering from that. So it's very important. They can talk with individuals who have gotten into trouble with the law and have substance use disorders. It helps them talk to someone that speaks their language, so to speak, knows where they've been, and can kind of point them in the right direction. I think one of the most satisfying things that I've had in my 2 years here, almost 2 years here in the prosecutor's office as acting prosecutor, is when we had a graduation of an individual who had gotten into our Operation Helping Hand program, went through the whole program and came out the other side successful. It was a great day because typically, as most people probably understand, prosecutor's office, we're arresting criminals and throwing them in jail where a lot of them need to be. But there's a whole nother side to the prosecutor's office that most people don't know about. And that's why I think this is an important thing to talk about, that, we are interested in things other than, prosecuting criminal acts. We have programs like Operation Helping Hand. We have programs like LEAP. And those are there to prevent people and to assist people from ever becoming part of the criminal justice system, because that's a system that no one wants to be involved in if they can avoid it.
Thank you, prosecutor. And I know when I first started working in this county, I used to say, I thought the prosecutors were, throwing away the keys, like you said, lock them up. And I was always been so impressed by the prosecutor's office and all the folks that work in law enforcement in our county on how much that they try to help get, especially our youth, back on the right track. So on behalf of all of us residents here, we want to say thank you to the prosecutor and law enforcement, because it is just incredible the amount of effort and time you do to try to help people. So question we have for you, Coach Bill, on the issue of stigma. I know it's not just the kids, it's also parents and families. We don't seek help because this means we have to admit we actually have a real problem that changes everything. How do we best address this? What do you think from your experiences?
So help me, could you please help reframe that for me a little bit?
So how do we really address stigma? As you mentioned, being in long-term recovery, and the stigma of someone having a substance use disorder, as well as families and parents to get to understand what the issue really is. How do we address stigma so people can understand that it is a brain disease?
And I really believe, you know, the idea of nobody, let me think here. When we can connect, right? And I'm going to say it again, when the conversations happen, the power of common suffering, right? That nobody's thinking like nobody, that stigma, I understand it, but it's learning to not listen to that boogeyman. And that's just a term that idea of, and walking through that, and which I understand, I'm not minimizing those feelings of feeling that, but we have to learn to not, and it's a process, and learn to, I know it's easier said than done, but to not let that voice, that thought, and walk through it. And that's what we have to learn to do. And I know it's easier said than done, but it's like I say in my office 8 trillion times. I've said in the team room at 100 Central 8 trillion times, learning to not listen to that boogeyman, to do the next right thing. That idea of, okay, the stigma. So it's a fear, which I understand, maybe a fear of what I think somebody's going to think, or what they're thinking, or how do I to learn to feel it, breathe through it, but walk through it and do the next right thing, which is ask for help, reach out to somebody, start the conversation, and almost usually, if not all the time, instantly, the walls go down. It's not, you don't, you get to another side of it, and that stigma can, but you have to walk it. And I know it's easier said than done. Am I answering that question? Did I get it?
I think you're
Is that-
talking about, as I said, Coach, for the individual themselves is to stand up and keep moving forward. With just the last few minutes, because I know that this group is passionate, and all the knowledge we have so much more. Stigma, until we can get out of the shadows and families and people understand that we're all here to support and help, and it's a disease, and it shouldn't be something that's shunned or to feel that it can't be discussed. The more that we can discuss, especially our mental health illness and substance use disorder, the more that we can get the help and support from our community, because supporting our recovery community is also just as critical, because those that are in recovery need our support and understanding as well. Coach, did you want to add something?
I'm sorry. And I'm just,
You're fine.
just that idea of, and the power of, and again, I know it's easier said than done, right? The power of common suffering, because, and I know I said it when we met the other night, that idea of what I have learned and been around and had the privilege of being around thousands of recovering people. And one of the things that absolutely, you know, that early connection of being and listening to somebody who, like Prosecutor Williams had said, the power of common suffering, when you can talk with someone who's talking that talk, and you learn, you just begin to learn, maybe I'm not alone, maybe I'm not crazy, maybe I'm not bad, right? You start to identify with how somebody, and you realize, and that's really where it starts. It really is. You make a connection and you start to just begin to realize, maybe I'm not bad. Maybe I'm not what this thing has been telling me for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah, and I'm gonna chime in really quickly. You know, I think, you know, Taylor, I mean, there were times when he would say, like, you know, what is wrong with me, and why can't I do the right thing? I mean, you know, substance use disorder is a disease. If, as a parent, if Taylor had cancer instead of a substance use disorder, nobody would think twice. Like they'd be, oh my gosh, he's got cancer. This terrible, and we need to get to a place as a society where you recognize that families like mine, people like my son, and the thousands and thousands of other young people and adults who are struggling with substance use disorder, that they have a disease and they deserve the same compassion. This is not a moral failing. This is not somebody who's just making bad choices and trying to ruin their lives. That is not what it is. They are beautiful people who are loved by people, and they have a disease. And we all have a responsibility to start using language that supports that. I really try not to use the word addict. I really try to, someone who suffers with substance use disorder, they may have an addiction. So I think, just the language that we use, and that we start to bring compassion to it, because I know for, even for myself, when we first were going through it, I felt a lot of shame. I think as parents, when our kids are struggling, we feel like we've done something wrong. I thought it was my feeling I wasn't a good enough parent. And I had done things wrong. And I think, parents hold a lot of shame. You don't want anybody to know that your child is struggling. You become the pariah of the community. There were definitely people in our community who didn't want to associate with Taylor or our family. And, to an extent, I get with behaviors that go with substance use disorder. I get it to some extent, but we've got to change the lens that we look through as a society. And, everybody on this call tonight can be part of that, because everybody who dialed in obviously has, they care about it, tremendously. And as parents, we need to demand better. I saw a lot of questions about what can the health profession do. And I think as parents, we've got to demand non-opioid pain management options, and start asking our doctors for them, and demanding them, because there are alternatives out there. You do not have to give your child opiates, and it needs to be a real conversation.
And
Real
I think
quick, Leslie, if I could just mention one thing.
Sure,
it's something that both Tom and you, Carrie, had just mentioned. As a prosecutor, in being in my age group, you grew up with certain terms, a drug addict, a former addict. And I think language is so important. I think you have to start there. If you start with that level, and talk about substance use disorder, and talk about a person in recovery, as opposed to those more pejorative terms that people like to cast on people. I think that's a great start. And from there, you can build forward.
Yeah, totally agree. One of the things that we've been working on in our community is I do want to make sure that we make the point that there are many prescribers and many doctors in our community that have been working very hard as far as reducing the amount of prescriptions that have been prescribed, working on alternatives. And I will tell you we have statistics and data that shows that we are on the decline, not just in the state, but especially in Hunterdon County. So we are turning the corner in the right direction of trying to do some of these things to get these potent medications not even prescribed. Some of the things that are difficulties that is that insurance companies don't always cover some of the alternatives. We also live in a society where people want pain relief instantly. So they want the medication, or the medication sometimes is cheaper, but it's only cheaper in the short run. Those are some of the things that we're working on as an agency. And I saw one of the questions to come in is, what can we do overall in prevention? Well, overall in prevention, as we're talking tonight about starting to change the language, but also understanding as parents, and even as a young adult, is that we can ask for alternatives. And alternatives include, when we're saying alternatives, we're talking about physical therapy, ice, heat, over-the-counter pain medications, chiropractic care, acupuncture, yoga, mindfulness. These are all ways that we can utilize to manage pain that has not been the way that, especially Americans, that we have really been in a society that we haven't done that. But some of the other things that I feel it's incredibly important to mention is about Narcan training. If you know of someone that has a substance use disorder, or you live in a household where someone is struggling, is critical to get the reversal medication called Narcan. And I'm hoping one of my colleagues can help put that information in. Our agency provides training. We can connect people to Narcan to get you free Narcan kits. Chief, could you talk about law enforcement as far as carrying Narcans and managing the reversals?
Yeah, every prosecutor Kearns some years ago started a program where every law enforcement officer in Hunterdon County was to carry Narcan, and they do today. It's a huge boost to saving lives, right? We're not here to judge and things along those lines. We're here to protect, serve, and save lives. And so giving someone another chance is paramount. It's what we do. It's what we're supposed to do. And every officer in Hunterdon County carries them now. Our prosecutor's office carries them as well. Our first aid squad carries them as well. It has gone a long way to saving a lot of people who had overdosed and were reversed.
Thank you, Chief. And I know that I saw that my colleague Rocky Schwartz put in the chat, so you can reach Rocky. Put her contact information about connecting you to free Narcan training. Please reach out. We also have something that I want to make sure that our community knows about called the Family Support Center. Our Family Support Center works with family members that have a loved one that are battling substance use disorder, because it's not just the individual, it's the whole family. And I think, Carrie, as we've heard tonight, and as well as within Taylor's story, the whole family. It's not just the person that's struggling, it's all the family members. And thank you, Amanda, she posted that information. So we're able to help family members as well as ensure that there's self-care and they have other people that they can then talk to. So it's a great, another initiative that we have to support our community. If we can just take, yes, go ahead. Yes,
just something I thought was important that we had spoke with Carrie yesterday. We had a discussion. I would just like if she could possibly point out to some people. You had told us the story about your daughter and that when your daughter was going to be prescribed an opioid, they gave you the exact. Could you please just let people know how you handle that and because listen, I understand people don't want to be in pain. I get it. It's surgeries and things along those lines. But if there's alternatives that work just as good, but maybe they're a little bit more expensive, I think most people would opt for those items. Could you just share what you shared with us yesterday about that?
Sure. So when the doctor said that they would be prescribing her opiates, and I pushed back obviously and pretty strongly, and then they pushed back again, and then in the end I was like, she's not having opiates, so you got to come up with something else. And what they came up with was an alternative treatment, and there are more than one, but the one that she happened to have was a medication called Exparel, and it was injected into her pain block. So like if you have an orthopedic surgery, a lot of times you're given a block so that that area stays numb, so that you can, be discharged from the hospital and the first couple hours at your home, you're not in pain. Well, what this particular medication does is it extends the pain block. And so for her, instead of the pain block wearing off in 8 to 12 hours, I think for most people it wears off in 3 to 4 days. For her, it lasted a little longer. It lasted 6 days. But we managed her pain with Tylenol and ibuprofen. Same with wisdom teeth. Both of my children, when they had their wisdom teeth out, oral surgeons were saying, here's a prescription of the opiate long before we even went in to have the surgery. And I refused the prescription and said, we're not taking that. Taylor was in recovery at the time. He was 18 years old. And managed it with Tylenol. And just like Leslie was talking about, there are other things out there. And I think when we push healthcare providers, to work with us and find those alternatives. And like Leslie said, insurance companies, we are seeing some change with that. My husband works for a major health insurance company. And so, I was shocked at how the system is it worked, and hers was covered. But the problem for doctors is the way a lot of it happens, that medicine is not carved out, meaning we pay for it out of our insurance. So it comes out of the doctor's bottom line. And so there's a little bit of a disincentive for doctors to prescribe it. But again, I mean, a lot of the folks who are practicing now, and I've talked to a lot of doctors because I've been scratching my head at, why we haven't made more progress, even with some reduction in prescribing. But that when people went to medical school, who a lot of them are practicing now, pain was the fifth symptom, and they were taught if they did not manage pain, they were not being good doctors. And that kind of goes back to what Leslie was saying. In our country, the goal for a lot of doctors or people is zero pain. In other countries, that is not, that's not it. That that pain is our body's way of saying slow down and stop for a minute. And I would give anything if I had slowed down and said, look, he can be in pain. Like, he can be in pain. But there are, just like Frank's saying, there are other alternatives. And I think when we start demanding them as consumers, they'll start to, one, create more of them. And my hope is that we can put that industry out of business. And there is a use for it. I mean, I do think that doctors, there's a legitimate use for opioids and fentanyl in a medical environment, but not for every orthopedic or oral surgery known to man. I mean, we're doing it too much, and these young people, it's changing their lives. And I know a lot of young people who, were in treatment with my son that I've kept in touch with. And a lot of them started out exactly like that, sports injuries and prescriptions, and even in their parents' medicine cabinets. I mean, kids who want something, and they'll tell you this, if they want it, they'll find a way to get it. And so when you say, how can you get it? Well, it's in medicine cabinets. They go to parties, they look in other families' medicine cabinets. If they're looking for it, they're going to try to find it. And it's easy to get on the street. I used to always ask Taylor that question, like, how do you get all this stuff? And, he's like, Mom, getting it is not the issue. Like that, unfortunately that's not the issue.
Yeah. And I think, Carrie, you mentioned this, those that know might have seen on the news, Dr. Laura, who used, again, she did all the columns and marital advice and things like that.
Marriage. Yeah.
Yeah. So she unfortunately lost her 16-year-old son. And she thought during the pandemic, both her boys, I believe I know she has two kids, but her one son unfortunately died of an overdose, thought he was buying Xanax, but got it off of Snapchat. So when you talk about, Carrie, just like that, like, they're not going anywhere. How are they getting it? Again, that's not the issue. Just one more question, only because I tell you the questions, we'll make sure that your questions definitely ensure that we can put them on our website. I see this one question here asking about in Norwegian countries, there are drug testers in order to ensure that that the drug someone's choosing to take, even though that is illegal, are not laced. It's asking, is there something similar in the United States? There are certain things called fentanyl strips that you can, but understand that there are folks that are seeking. Most of the people do end up wanting that ultimate high. So yes, there is, but understand, even without fentanyl, you can still die from a heroin overdose or prescription pain medication that is properly prescribed, if not taken the way as prescribed. So please ensure that that yes, there are those strips that are available, part of the harm reduction. Listen, we can't say thank you enough for this information, and we know, as we talked the other night when we were meeting our panelists, that we can talk and continue to talk about the things. But I want to say on behalf of my agency, Prevention Resources, and our Safe Communities Coalition, just thank you so much. Thank you for all our participants for joining us. We've also recorded this event, so we'll make sure. But with the last few minutes we have, and I want to just also please, I see Amanda's putting it in the chat box. When you exit tonight, there'll be just a few questions. If you could help us out and answer that. We also, at Prevention Resources, as encouragement, we will also give out some random prizes for your time to do the evaluation, because that evaluation will help us gear some of our further programming. So if you could really help us out and do that, it would be great. With the final few minutes, one of the things, Chief, could you tell us about the app Safe School? Because that's brand new in our county. I want to make sure the listeners know about what that app is.
Yes, it is brand new. We launched it about a week ago. It is available in the App Store, the Apple Store, Android as well. It is called 100 Safe Schools. All you'd have to do is go in there. It's a free download. It is just another tool in the toolbox that we use to try to help people in our community. In this case, it's more geared towards children in their schools. I have 3 children, and it seems that most of them are very engaged in their phone and apps along the way. And it is just a way that we're trying to use to communicate with the youth in our schools, to try to get them to communicate to us about concerns across the gamut, from criminal, serious criminal situations that they could report to us anonymously, to administrative stuff and things along the lines of bullying and concerns that they have in the schools that could be dealt with this app. It's important to know that it is a total law enforcement related app. It is something that we've collaborated with your group in prevention resources, with Hunter Medical Center in the mental health community, with the schools and the superintendents, and with also our commissioners in Hunterdon County. To just real quick, how it works is they download the app. They have the app. They can give a tip. It's got to be manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's done by our communications office in Hunterdon County. It's also monitored for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by law enforcement, by somebody in our office, a detective that we have assigned to that, so that nothing falls through the cracks. And if it is an emergent situation that needs an emergency response, we're able to do that. It's important to know the success of this within the first day that we had this launched. It saved someone's life. So that was a big boost in the arm for us, as to all the time that we used to try to get this out and about. And thank you, Amanda, for putting that on the screen. That is it right there. That's a QR code. You can scan into it, but the best way to go about it is to go onto the Apple Store and just download it. And hopefully it's going to be as successful as it was at the first day, which is really the goal, is trying to help people. And it's not something where we're trying to be overbearing with law enforcement. We're trying to get people to be able to communicate as they choose to communicate, to try to get help for themselves or someone else.
Thank you, Chief. Amanda, could you also put up our QR code for the Help app? The Help app will connect, and it's geared towards teens. And what we really like about this app, it was designed by a code club of 2 students at Hunterdon Central. And what's great about this app is that students can, young people can text where there's texting abilities. It's local, state, and federal resources, hotline numbers. It's on suicide, domestic abuse prevention, bullying, substance use prevention. Please, we're asking everyone to download this app. You also can see up on the screen some ways to dispose of medications in your home. Thank you, Amanda, for putting that up. The one thing that is very critical that I'm asking every single person that's participated tonight is to please make sure that you let everyone know about the Good Samaritan Act. The Good Samaritan Act is, if somebody needs help, whether it's a substance, whether it's illegal, legal, alcohol, please, please, if someone is in need of help, that you pick up the phone and call. You will receive amnesty under the law for calling for help. For the person that needs help yourself, you can save a life. So please make sure you remember that. Don't try to judge or guess whether they need help. Pick up the phone and call. I want to thank Coach Bill for teaching many of our teens, and continues to help all the youth about doing the next right thing. I know from personal experience, he has many athletes look up to him and continue to do so, and all the kids that you help. So thank you, Coach Bill. Prosecutor Williams, thank you for instilling in the community for all the help programs and the referral and ensuring that kids can get back on the right track and trying to help people. Thank you so much. Chief, thank you for continuing to partner and to make sure that we are ensuring that our law enforcement officers are working with us in the community to make a safer place for us. And thank you for all you do on a personal level to help us in prevention. We're very grateful. In the last few moments, Carrie, I want to say on behalf of all of us, your courage and your voice in sharing Taylor's message and continuing to share, we're so very grateful, and the courage that you've displayed tonight. And we're going to continue to ensure that we carry on these messages that you've given to us. Carrie, is there anything else that you'd like to share in the last few moments?
Well, I want to thank you all for having us, and like the chief said, the story doesn't end well for us, and I fought like hell as a mom to help Taylor, and and that's why we try to share our story, because I believe in being transparent, and I believe if people don't step up and they don't show what this looks like and this can happen to anybody, that's part of erasing that that stigma. And I know for me, my Taylor, and you heard it mentioned, he had a tattoo, and I hated tattoos, but he had this tattoo, and it said, if you think it's hard to watch, imagine how hard it is to live. And that has helped me so much, since we lost him, to really think about the struggle that people have, not only with substance use disorder, but just in general, that there are a lot of people who love him, and that's hard, but that people who are going through it, really deserve compassion and help. And I love that you guys are doing so many out of the box things. We're going to steal some of them in Virginia, I hope, and bring them back here. But if anybody, wants to reach out to me, we have a Facebook page, and I think Peggy can post some of that stuff in the chat. But our mission is to share Taylor's story. And I say, as hard as it is to do it, because I don't think I'll ever watch that video and not be in tears. But it makes me feel like there's a little more of him in the world. And as a mom, that gives me some peace. And I do feel like when I share his story that he's with me. So thank you guys for giving us the opportunity. I'm really grateful.
We continue to keep you in our hearts, Carrie, you and your family. So thank you so much. And thank you all for being with us tonight. And I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda.
Thank you all again for coming tonight. Once again, the survey will pop up as soon as you exit the webinar. So if you could just take a minute and fill that out, we would greatly appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.